Hi, people. Hope you're all well. So, want to say a few words about this attack in Germany in Magdeburg last night. I didn't make an initial video, and in a way, that's probably retrospectively a good thing because this case is strange. There's things coming out from this that don't really add up. I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, but just um, it's not really as would be expected in a terrorist attack. What I mean by that is I looked at Frank Gardner's take on this on the BBC as it was breaking news last night, and he said that it's an unusual thing because usually with terrorist attacks, it's young men, and in Europe they've often been of North African descent. In this case, we have a 50-year-old who is was born in Saudi Arabia. I understand he's been in Germany since 2006. He's a doctor. Others are saying that I've heard it said he has background in psychology. There's always has to be a degree of caution, I think, with these things as they happen because so much information goes around, and until the dust settles, I think it's right that there's a degree of caution. I'll be honest. My first instinct was, okay, it's probably an Islamist attack because there's a history of that in Europe. In 2016, there was the attack at Nice. I'm talking about this type of attack, the vehicle ramming attack, that awful incident in Nice, 86 people killed. In Berlin that Christmas, um, dozen people killed in the Berlin market that year. ISIS, claimed responsibility in both cases. Then we had the Westminster Bridge attack the following year. So there is a history in Europe of vehicle attacks at the hands of Islamists. I believe Barcelona also had that sort of attack. So my first instinct was, yeah, it's some sort of Islamist attack, and I thought perhaps it's some sort of statement over Germany's support for Israel. That was my conjecture, and it was only conjecture. I had no idea. Um, the latest information is that five people were killed and over 80 injured. Some of them are very serious injuries, so that death toll may rise. The Daily Mail was reporting 11 had been killed. The main BBC news was saying it was five, but it's an awful incident. There was a 9-year-old girl among those killed. But the strange thing about this, I've mentioned the demographics of the suspect. The Saudi Arabian embassy was very quick to denounce it, presumably because they'd heard he was born as a Saudi Arabian. I don't know if he had German citizenship or not. Um, it's very hard to know what to make of this because the strange thing that's being reported is that he apparently had strong anti-Islam views and he was liking tweets by Elon Musk and the German AfD. And incidentally, Musk was, sticking his nose into German politics today, saying that the only hope for Germany is the AfD. I don't want to make this video about Musk, but I would say that it's up to the Germans to decide what their future is, if that's with the AfD or if it's with, some sort of whatever happens when Schultz steps down next year. It's up to the Germans. I'm sick and tired of Elon Musk sticking his nose into European politics. Um, but that's for another video. I think Musk is a malign influence on democracy. I absolutely do not respect what he's doing. But that's yeah. Um, I'll just say this from a personal perspective. I know of people who gravitate from one extreme to another. I've come across people like that in my life, and someone who's lived under an Islamic regime knows much better than Westerners what that is like. I absolutely abhor pan-Islamism, and I do see it as an existential threat, particularly in Europe. And I do think that far too often Europe has been spineless in this. I do think there has been a dangerous political correctness, particularly in countries like Germany, um, even on the main BBC report, the counter extremism expert was talking to the BBC about Islamophobia. That was the whole line she was going down. Now, I think Angela Merkel made a grave mistake by allowing in so many people in that big influx in 2015. Um, it's just reckless. It's not a humane policy to have unlimited immigration. It's not, and it doesn't make you far right to point that out. Um, Particularly when you have culture clashes, particularly when you have people coming into Western society that have views that are very different from what would be a conventional Western viewpoint, like equality for women um, and gay rights and that sort of thing. But it's, I do not believe in cultural relativism in the sense of saying that all cultures are equal. Some cultures do have a more regressive attitude than others. It's just a reality. Um, and I do think that, particularly in a country like Germany, if the AfD has got traction, it's because probably a lot of Germans are tired of being told that they're racist for having concerns about Islamic extremism. Now, coming back to this case, um, by the way, some people, there is questions about, well, what was the security like? Honestly, I think I've been in German markets, Christmas markets. They're very busy. Even if you have bollards up to stop a vehicle getting in, I understand what he done was drove the vehicle through the ambulance lane, which was cleared for emergency vehicles. Even in that situation, I think it's almost impossible to absolutely prevent terrorism. It used to be that terrorists would use bombs, and that would be their main method. In the last decade, it's been more vehicle attacks. Now, you can't ban cars. You can, have restrictions in certain areas, but I do think that it's very difficult to absolutely prevent terrorism. By all means, there should be efforts to minimize it, but I think it's very hard to completely prevent it. Um, but with this incident in Magdeburg, it's to say that's well known. I understand in German history, the Magdeburg Riots, I think, was part of the Protestant Reformation. It's a city that's well known for that, very historic city. I've not been there, but it's not a huge city, population about 240,000. So it'll be a big shock for that place. But what I was saying was in these German markets, they get very, very busy. Sadly, that, maximizes the number of casualties. But I don't know what direction this will go. I mean, I mentioned that I've had personal experience of people going from one extreme to another. I've known a few ex-Muslims, and my instinct has always been very sympathetic and understanding because these are people who have experienced pan-Islamism directly. Um, and the fact of the matter is, the attitude within Islam to apostasy, that is, people leaving it, is extremely intolerant. That needs to be called out. We hear about Islamophobia in Europe. Well, what about the attitude towards ex-Muslims? Um, what about apostophobia? That needs to be challenged. And frankly, too many politicians, mainstream politicians, are cowardly with this. They won't talk about it because they feel, oh, it's pandering to the far right, it's Islamophobic. They need to get a backbone and talk about this issue. I remember there was a case in Britain actually where an Islamist drove something like 200 miles from, I think it was from Lancashire, and he murdered a man in Glasgow because the man who had some sort of personal feud with him, another Muslim who had been moderate, he wished his Christian neighbours, well, and it was some sort of personal grudge, and he actually drove hundreds of miles to murder this man. We saw it in France. Teacher Samuel Paty was beheaded by Islamists. So anyone who says that Europe doesn't have a problem with Islamism is a dishonest fool, or they're just being disingenuous. So I instinctively do have sympathy with ex-Muslims and people, particularly if they've, been disowned by their family and things like that. It's an awful situation for anyone to be in. So I do instinctively have a lot of sympathy for them. However, I personally had an experience this year, and I'm not going to name names, but I knew a woman who was an ex-Muslim. I'm not sure what her background was. It was either Egypt or Iran, but we were sort of connected for a while, and I always took her to be. We originally connected via a mutual group, and I thought she was always. I agreed with a lot of her points, but I always noticed there was something a little bit off about her, whereby she'd be a little bit of a loose cannon and come into. She would certainly be the sort of person who would delve into conspiracy theories and things like that. But more often than not, I agreed with some of the positions that she had. But basically, we fell out earlier this year because I condemned the riots. I condemned the racist riots in this country, and because of that, I also called out Tommy Robinson directly. But I think Tommy Robinson fans are flames. And I said so. Well, instead of just agreeing to disagree, she took this very personally and she got into an extremely personal tirade against myself and brought people I care about into it. So I was a little bit disgusted by that. It was, a side to her I hadn't seen before. And basically, she was really coming out with some far right bile. Some of the things she was saying was just outrageous, and I told her so. And we had a falling out and blocked me. But the point I'm making here is, you can get someone who's experienced an extreme thing and they've been a victim or they've seen that side of it, but then they can themselves become radicalized. I've heard of far right types who have kind of found the light, or so they think, and they've converted to Islam. It's like almost going from one extreme to another, and there's just no moderation. It's a duality of thinking. I've seen it a few times. Try to think of another example. Well, yeah, I have another personal example, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here. I'll just say this briefly, and I'm not going to name names because that's not the purpose of this video. But around 10 years ago, I vocally defended. People could probably look this up anyway, but it is what it is. I vocally defended a Thai woman who had become quite a prominent critic of that country's infamous lèse majesté laws, which are very rigid laws designed to protect the monarchy. And anyway, it's notorious for its brutal assault on free speech. I basically defended her right to free speech and her right to criticise these laws. She came to Britain essentially as a refugee, or I should say an asylum seeker, because her life was threatened in Thailand. I was very outspoken about it. I defended her, but never met her personally, but I defended her. And I've no regrets for doing that because the principle remains unchanged. I think I was right to do so. Unfortunately, I stopped following her a few years ago. I disconnected from her because she became a real mouthpiece for Russian propaganda and Putin. Basically, I thought this is disgraceful. You're in a country that has given you refuge. And how do you thank us? You parrot the propaganda of a hostile foreign force. And she was a real conspiracy nut. I mean, really, the definition of a off the grid conspiracy theorist. She was constantly pushing anti-vax stuff, constantly, digging a rabbit hole. I just got fed up of reading it, so I didn't, I didn't confront her, but I just no, I don't want to be connected with you anymore. And the point I'm making with that is, I once upon a time I thought she was a courageous person who confronted extremism. She ended up as an extremist. So we shouldn't underestimate people who go from one extreme to another. So in conclusion, it's possible that this guy was an ex-Muslim who went to the other extreme. Possible. It's also possible that he was an Islamist and this was a ruse because apparently he'd harassed ex-Muslims. I know people who are in that position, and they have said that they were personally harassed by this guy years ago. Um, I I assume they've had no contact with him recently, but I just would make the point that you cannot underestimate someone going from one extreme to another. And this is, there's grave consequences here because extremism takes numerous forms. We've seen Islamist extremism, we've seen far right extremism, I would argue eco extremism. Um, Moderates need to speak out. There has to be consistency, and everyone of good faith and good, you know, people just need to speak for reason and moderation when it comes to this sort of thing, because otherwise these people are just going to keep getting more emboldened. Um, I mean, this could actually be, and I'm just speculating here, but let's say this was an Islamist attack. It would be quite a clever ruse to pin it on ex-Muslims and to try and say, well, this guy was an ex-Muslim, so they're the real threat. I mean, no one should ever take their eye off the ball when it comes to pan-Islamism, but I do think it's a strange case, and it is not what I expected it would be. as the details have emerged. It's not, I honestly thought it would be 23-year-old Islamist, like we've seen in other attacks, that sort of thing. It hasn't been the case. And he is not a new refugee. This is a guy who's been in Germany for 18 years. So we're not talking about someone who arrived last year in a boat from the Mediterranean. This is someone who's been in Germany for a long time. Um, but Germany, as with the rest of Europe, clearly has a problem with extremism. And I just don't know where all of this heads. In Britain, we cannot rule it out. But it's an awful thing. Whatever his motivation was, whatever his ideology was, someone who, I mean, Frank Gardner was postulating that he could have been, disgruntled at work. He could have been mentally deranged. And the thing is, people get angry when, mental illness is brought up, but it shouldn't be totally dismissed. If someone is highly mentally unstable, then it's not an excuse when they attack. It could just be an explanation. Um, I don't think it's an excuse, but I mean, I don't think it's used as an excuse. But if someone is mentally deranged, then the thing, I guess, in legal proceedings would be to determine what was his motivation and what was his mental state, etc., etc. Um, but he should die behind bars. This guy should never be released ever. Um, it's an evil, horrendous act because he has destroyed dozens of lives. There's going to be people there with life-changing injuries. Little 9-year-old girl. I mean, so close to Christmas, it's horrendous. It's a horrendous incident. Let me know your thoughts.